Nvidia's Quadro graphics cards, if there's one thing these workstation GPUs aren't designed for, it's gaming. But gaming is technically possible on these GPUs, but how smoothly will it go? To find out, I've tested this Quadro K4000 in a few games today to see how it gets on in gaming in 2023. So, do you own an Nvidia Quadro card? Let me know in the comments down below. You might be sitting there scratching your head thinking, why on earth are you testing an 11-year-old Quadro graphics card in some games? And the answer to that is, mainly because I just wanted to be honest. I got this Quadro in a HP workstation and it's just been lying around ever since because I didn't need it in the round of content I used for that machine. So I thought I may as well put it to some good use and to get some gaming graphics card benchmarking content out. I'm not saying that you should go out there and buy a Quadro for gaming because that is not what the purpose of this graphics card is, and even if you did want to game on it, the performance isn't particularly brilliant from what we're about to see. That is because this graphics card is not designed for it. It's for business users that want to do 3D modeling and video rendering and stuff like that. That's what this graphics card is designed for. So the Quadro K4000 has the same GK106 core as the GTX 660, albeit it is slightly cut down at just 768 CUDA cores. Unlike the GTX 660 though, it does have 50% more VRAM at 3GB of GDDR5 compared to the GTX 660's 2GB. 3GB of VRAM might actually help out in a few games today, but judging by how powerful the rest of the GPU is, I'm not sure if it's going to be that much of a help. But do you want to know what the biggest thing about this graphics card was back in 2012? It wasn't the performance, it wasn't the VRAM. Do you know what it really was? It was the price tag. Guess how much this Quadro would have cost a business back then? $300? $400? $500? No, the MSRP on this thing was $1,249 US, which is absolutely insane. Yes, that is four figures for a graphics card which will perform worse than a 650 Ti, a graphics card that launched at just $150 US when it came out in 2012. So yeah, that's pretty embarrassing for the Quadro, but as I've said, this is not what the Quadro is designed for. It's designed for business applications, not gaming. So how well does this single slot old workstation graphics card get on in 2023? To find out, I've put it onto my test bench system, which has an Intel Core i5-12400F, 32GB of dual rank, dual channel, 3200MHz DDR4 memory, an MSI B660-A Pro motherboard, and a Sabrent 1TB NVMe Gen 3 SSD. All testing has been done on the latest Studio driver, as this graphics card is actually still supported by Nvidia, which is a benefit of the Quadro cards. They are supported for much longer. And no overclocking has been done to the Quadro, it's left totally stock. So let's see how this old workstation card gets on in 2023. First game up today is GTA 5, and here I set it to the high preset with FXAA. I didn't think MSAA would have been a good option here, and I actually think I thought right, and that is because on average the Quadro K4000 only got 48 FPS with a 1% low of 42. So it is below 60 FPS on average, but it is quite consistent with that 1% low being quite near to the average, so GTA 5's performance here is not too bad to be honest, but maybe drop the settings a bit if you want to get above 60 FPS. The next game up is The Witcher 3, and this is probably the most disappointing game today. It did receive an update which revamped a lot of the visuals in the game. So here I set it to 720p with the low preset and FXAA. This only netted 35 FPS on average with a 1% low of 27. Do bear in mind this was in Novigrad, which is the most demanding place in the game, so your frame rate might vary depending on where you are in the game, but overall, The Witcher 3's performance is very disappointing and you're probably better off playing this on an Xbox One, to be honest. The tide's turned for the next game, and that is because Rainbow Six Siege is up next. Here I set it to the low preset, which is very fitting for today's video, but the frame rate wasn't bad at 71 FPS on average with a 1% low of 53 FPS. So if you want to play Rainbow Six Siege and get at least somewhat of a competitive frame rate, this Quadro will deliver the frame rate for you. Yes, it's not the best in the world, but if you're on a budget like this, you've probably got a 60Hz monitor anyway, so 71 FPS is totally fine in this title. So yeah, Rainbow Six Siege is definitely playable on an 11-year-old Quadro. Next up is a game which I like to use on graphics cards like this, and that is Skyrim Special Edition. This is the 2016 release of the game, so it looks a bit better than the original 2011 release. However, setting it to the high preset, which I wish I didn't, because this netted 34 FPS on average with a 1% low of 30 FPS. So this is very similar to what the Xbox One would have used in terms of quality and actual performance as well. So yeah, if you're used to that on the Xbox One, 34 FPS is not too bad in this game. However, I would probably recommend lowering it to the medium preset or maybe even low to get more frame rate. Next game up is the Halo Master Chief Collection, and more specifically Halo Reach, as personally I do think Reach is the best game of the Master Chief Collection, and it's probably one of the most popular as well. Here I set it to the original graphics settings, and this netted 59 FPS on average with a 1% low of 48 FPS. This performance makes the game very playable, and I had no problems playing the firefight on this, so if you want to play Halo Reach on a budget, this Quadro will give you the performance to do so. It looks better than the original Xbox 360 release, and it also runs at twice the frame rate as well, so what isn't there to like about this? Next game up is Fortnite, and this is probably the one that surprised me the most because this is the best performing game today. Here I set it to the performance API for obvious reasons. We're going to need as much performance as possible with all the settings on low apart from textures. This netted a frame rate of 116 FPS on average with a 1% low of 66 FPS. The poor 1% low figure comes from Fortnite's tendency to stutter quite a bit, and this is usually down to caching. So for future videos I'm going to play it a bit more before testing to let the caching do its job. So that 1% low right there, I wouldn't look into it too much. Last game up today is Fallout New Vegas, and this is probably the most consistent performing game, and it should be as it launched in 2010. Here I set it to the ultra quality, which is what it defaulted to, and for the 1% low and the average it was 60 FPS. This is because the game is hard locked to 60 FPS because Bethesda used to use a very archaic engine where it would tie the physics to the frame rate, so 60 FPS is the most I'd recommend it in these older Bethesda games. But even so, performance is totally playable here, and if you're one for nostalgia like me, playing Fallout New Vegas on this GPU is certainly a good thing to do because, yeah, it's not a bad game by any means. In all honesty, the performance is in line with what I was expecting. With specs like these and non-game ready drivers, performance in a lot of games isn't going to be particularly incredible. Even though a lot of these games did look appalling with the settings that I chose today, because high and even medium settings in a lot of these games wasn't exactly viable, they were still technically playable. That's if you consider lower than 60 FPS playable. And some games I even had to lower to 720p, like The Witcher 3 was just incredibly hard to run on this graphics card for whatever reason, and it just about scraped 30 odd FPS at 720p, which is not particularly great, is it? But on the other hand, Fortnite was a big shocker in this, getting 116 FPS on average, which is something I was certainly not expecting, but that is performance I will take because, yeah, Fortnite at 1080p is not particularly the easiest game to run, albeit it is a bit more CPU demanding than GPU demanding, but 116 FPS on average, I think I'll take that performance. So if you were to buy an old business machine like this HP workstation that I got this from, and you just wanted a GPU to tide you over in games like Minecraft, Fortnite, Rainbow Six Siege, and even Counter-Strike and games like that, this GPU is totally fine, and it will tide you over until you upgrade to something slightly more powerful like an AMD RX 570 or 580, or even something like Nvidia's GTX 1060 6GB. It will get the job done just about in the meantime while you scrape up and save a bit. I know I've been there, I've played on some pretty shocking PCs in the past, including GT210s, and this Quadro would smoke the GT210 any day of the week. But yeah, as long as you keep your expectations in line and you expect slightly lower frame rates and lower graphical presets, the Quadro K4000 is perfectly capable of playing quite a few pretty fun titles. And even if you wanted to play the newest titles as well, you can't, because this is a Kepler based card, which means it doesn't support DirectX 12 at a feature level. DirectX 11 is pretty much the best you're going to get out of this graphics card. But then again, it doesn't have the horsepower to play most of the newer games anyway, so I wouldn't really worry too much about that. So should you go out and buy an Nvidia Quadro just to play games on it? And the answer to that is a definite no. There are much better value graphics cards on the used market, like AMD's RX 570, 580, and even Nvidia's GTX 1060 6GB. These graphics cards do go for a slight bit more than the Quadro, I believe, but they will offer more than double the gaming performance, and they have newer feature sets as well, like full support for DirectX 12 at a feature level, so that's already a pro of them cards right there. Also, these cards from both AMD and Nvidia are still supported by them, so they are still dropping game-ready drivers for both the RX 580 and the GTX 1060 6GB, so you're still getting optimizations for newer games as well. But on the other hand, if you're looking for a cheap HP workstation that's got a similarly spec'd Quadro inside it, I mean, if you just want to play lightweight titles, this graphics card is totally fine for games like that, and it's enough to tide you over until you buy something like the GTX 1060 as well. And even if you do upgrade the graphics card to something like a 1060 6GB or an RX 580, both of these graphics cards have more VRAM than the Quadro. So the 1060's got 6GB, so that's double the VRAM. And some RX 580s also have 8GB of frame buffer as well, which is very useful, especially in newer games. So the TLDR is, this graphics card is fine as sort of a stopgap, but I wouldn't go out and buy one specifically. There are much better options on the used market. So if you want to see some normal GPU benchmarks, there are 2 videos right here that might be right up your alley. And if you got this far into the video, consider leaving it a like, and I do appreciate you sticking around this long. It does help out with the channel, and if you really like the content, consider subscribing. It does help out around here. So I'm going to leave this video here. I'll catch you in the next one.